Okay, so this lab deals with an ETL lab that stands for extract, transform, and load, extracting data, for example, like data from an S3 bucket, transforming it into a database or a table, and then loading it, running queries, etc. And so, if you want to look at it, you can look at it as a three-step process where we can use S3 buckets to store data, and it could be just large quantities of data on Excel spreadsheets or that are converted as .csv files and store those on S3 buckets, but then use a serverless solution like AWS Glue to transform that data into a database and using an object under Glue called a crawler, like crawling on the ground to create tables from that database. And again, the benefit is all this is done in a serverless environment. So there's no servers or databases we need to create. It's all on the AWS platform. And then we can use a service like AWS Athena to query our database, run queries, store queries, run periodic queries, etc. Again, all this is done in a serverless environment. So probably the best bet we should do with this lab is our first step is let's find some sample data to download. So if I open a new tab in my Google browser and I type sample .csv files, and again, it's fictitious data, but it saves us the time. And if you click on it and scroll down, it saves us the time for having to extract or create data. So there's a couple. There's one with people, and it's 100 people or 1,000 people. I would say let's just click on people for 1,000. Right? It's the second link under people CSV samples, and just click on it, and that should automatically download it. And if you want, we'll do another one just in case. We'll do one with organizations. We'll select the first one with 100. Okay, so we'll download those two CSV files, which should get us going. Okay, we won't need this tab anymore, so we can just go ahead and close it. And you can double check your downloads folder to make sure I'm in documents. So if you check your downloads folder, you could see that you've downloaded two Excel.csv files. So people 1,000, organizations dash 100. Okay, so the first step in our process is first to create a couple of S3 buckets, one in which to store the data. The other one is when we use Athena to query the data, where do those queries get saved to? And we'll save them into a different bucket. Okay, so we'll click Start Lab, and I'll pause the video while we're waiting for the lab environment to load. Okay, I'm still waiting for the lab environment to load, but there's a couple things I wanted to mention. Again, right, this is from the AWS Academy Learner Lab. And if you click on modules and you click on launch the AWS Academy Learner Lab and start lab, you get to where we're at now. And it's been done several times. You should be familiar with it. Now in 3301, I kept going like, how do we reduce costs? How do we prevent recurring costs from occurring? Like we leave some services on. And I've been showing you how to break down certain services. And yes, it's probably good that I showed you because if you ever had a free account, then you would have to know how. But there's this feature in the AWS Academy Learner Lab. When we're done with the lab, we can click reset, and that completely wipes out everything. in our lab environment. Now, that may take a couple of hours for the lab to reset itself completely, but at the same time, from now on, we can just reset the lab instead of just like, okay, we're going to create S3 buckets. Now we're going to delete them. And we're going to create databases. Now we're going to delete them. It's good that I showed you that in the first course, right? But now we'll proceed with just hitting reset when we're done with the labs. Okay. So we've got a green light. Okay. So we're going to click on the AWS link. Okay, now keep in mind this is a serverless environment, right? There's no VPCs. I explained previously that when you create S3 buckets don't sit inside or are not part of your VPC, right? They're actually outside of your VPC. They're objects. Yes, they're your objects, and you're using them to store data or to host static websites, but they actually sit outside of your VPC. And if you want to connect to your S3 bucket from your VPC, you need what's called the VPC endpoint. If you just want to have a direct connection using a private link from your VPC to the S3 bucket within the AWS cloud region that you're in. Okay. If you don't set up the VPC endpoint, you can still reach your S3, but you could be incurred charges because then, in theory, you have to go out through your gateway from your VPC, right? If your EC2 has a public IP, for example, then it has an internet gateway. So it goes from your EC2 to your internet gateway to the internet cloud and then back down to your S3 in that same AWS region. So it's like taking the long way, right, to get home versus just driving directly to get there. Okay, so just wanted to clarify that and also what a VPC endpoint is. So with that said, let's get started. If it's recently visited, you can click on S3 or you could type S3 in the search and just click S3. And then from here, we want to select create a bucket. Okay. We want to create a general purpose bucket. Now we have to give our bucket a unique name. So what I would suggest you do, this is to store data, and we can name it, type your first name like John dash bucket data store, and maybe the last four digits of your work phone number. Like that's my phone number at work, 486-4054. Or you can use any random combination of four numbers. But again, as if you recall, the bucket name has to be unique within the AWS environment. So we got to be a little bit creative in creating the bucket. Okay, now for simple file storage and for the purposes of extracting data and loading data in a serverless environment, we don't need ACLs, and we can block all public access to it, and we can disable bucket versioning. Okay, and from there, we're just going to create our bucket. Okay, and that creates our bucket. Now, what we're going to do is create the second bucket to specify when Athena runs a query, it gives us output on our monitor screen, but it's also required that if you're going to run Athena, that it has to be sent somewhere and stored somewhere. We could store it in the same bucket, but I would like to use a different bucket. One's for data store and one's for query results. So we'll create a second bucket and we'll type John dash Athena dash query results. Okay. And you can stop, use your first name. And if you have to put a couple of numbers after it, you can. You can put a 1, 2, 3 or whatever. If it says that the bucket with that name already exists. And again, we'll just select create bucket. Okay, so now we have two buckets, right? We have one for the data store and the query results. So what we're going to do is take that CSV file that we downloaded, right? And we're going to upload it into the bucket called data store. Okay. So if you click on the bucket data store, notice there's no objects in there. Well, we're going to upload an object. So we're going to click upload and we are going to select add files. And we'll select the two files. We'll select organizations 100 and people 1000. And we'll select open. Okay. And then you scroll down and you select the upload button. Okay. And it should succeed. Okay. Well, for now, what we're going to do, uh, let's delete the organization one. Let's click on it. And let's go to object actions. And let's click close and click on organizations 100 and let's select delete. Let's just keep the people one in there. And we're going to have to type the words permanently delete. Get my spelling right. I believe AWS doesn't let you copy it. I've never tried it, but I'm just so used to just typing it in there. Okay, so let's click close. Okay, so the only object you should have in there is the people 1000. Okay, and so we've created our buckets. Okay, one for the data store, which has the people.csv file, and then one for the Athena query results. Okay, so our next step is go to a service called AWS Glue, right? Now, Glue is a serverless application for the second part of the process is transforming data. It could transform this data in a serverless environment into a database, and subsequently we can use crawler for creating tables. And then again, we can use Athena for running queries against those tables. So let's go to AWS Glue. We'll type Glue and we'll select AWS Glue. Okay, and then from here, right, we want to go to where it says Data Catalog in the left pane, and we want to select Databases. Okay, we're going to create our database first, and we're going to select Add Database, and we've got to enter a unique name. So we're going to call it Athena Query -DB, and call it anything you want, and then select Create Database. Okay, so since it's a serverless application, right? Notice we don't have to wait for the database to become available to us. Okay, it's pretty much ready. But what we have to do is we have to use crawlers to extract and transform the data that's maintained on the S3 bucket and transform that into a table. Okay, and so underneath data catalog, we click on crawlers, and then we'll select create a crawler, and we'll give it the crawler a name. We'll call John Dash Crawler Example, and you can type your first name, and then we'll select next. Okay. So data isn't quite mapped to Glue tables yet, right? And so now we got to add a data source. And so that would be our S3 bucket. So let's click Add Data Source. Our data source is going to be S3. The network connection's optional. We don't need that. And now we want to browse for enter an existing S3 path. So, and So we don't have to type the name ourselves. Let's click Browse S3 and select John Bucket Data Store 4054 or your first name and select Choose. Okay. Now notice how it pops up in red. You just need to add a forward slash after your bucket name. Okay. So what that says is that the path of looking for the file will be maintained in the S3 bucket. Okay. And the forward slash is kind of like the main parent folder. And then anything after the forward slash would be files or subfolders. Okay. And so from here, once we've got the data source, let's click Add an S3 data source at the bottom. Okay. And then let's click Next. Choose an existing IAM role. Now, we do have a lab IAM role set up. So let's just click Lab role. And let's click Next. The target database will be the database we just created. So if you click the drop down arrow, select Athena Query Database. Okay, and now the crawler schedule, you can extract data periodically. So for example, if the data from the S3 bucket is being constantly updated with new people and old people being removed and new people being added. You could run a schedule if you wanted to. You could run an hourly schedule. It could be, you got the big election coming up, so the political parties, this data that we're maintaining on the S3 bucket could be a list of registered voters, right? And that's constantly, you get new voters being registered and maybe some of the older voters, maybe some of them pass away or whatever. But whatever the database is being the data is being updated constantly. So you could run hourly um, schedules if you wanted to, right? To get the most updated voter registration rolls. I'm just throwing that out there as an example. But for our purposes, we'll select on demand and we'll select next. And we'll say select create crawler at the bottom. Go ahead and click that. Okay, and so what you want to do is you want to select at the bottom, well, hit the refresh here, and you got the lab IAM role correct. And so what you want to do is select run crawler. And the crawler is running. And it takes, since we have 1,000 people in the CSV file, it may take a couple minutes. So I'll just pause the video until the status changes. Okay, I'm still waiting for the crawler to run, but you should get a notice at the top here, right? It went from crawler attempting to start to crawler successfully starting, and the following crawler is now starting. Okay, so and I can hit refresh here. Okay, I didn't have to. Now that the crawler is completed, uh, we can go ahead and go to Athena and run queries from this database and table within the database that's been created in a serverless environment by AWS Glue. Okay, so crawler's all set to go. Next step is go to Athena. So you type Athena into search. Notice that the database that we created automatically pops up, and so do our tables. Okay, so if we see, you'll see our table down here, which is John Bucket underscore data store, right? That's the table we created from the crawler. And we'll click the plus sign, okay? And you'll see all the fields within that database or within that table, okay? And so our next step is to go ahead and click the three dots at the very top for it says John Bucket Data Store and click Preview Table. Now we got to specify an output location. Okay, it didn't work because forgot to do that, right? Notice up here it says before you run your first query, you need to set up a query result location in Amazon S3. Well, we already have an S3 bucket for that. So we'll just click Edit Settings, Browse S3, and now we want to select John Athena Query Results and select Choose, okay? And you'll just click Save. All right, and then once that's done, you can go back to Amazon Athena and select Launch Query Editor again. Should have taken effect. There you go. I refreshed it. Okay, and you get these notices, right? Supports code suggestions to speed up query development. You can close these windows. Okay, we're back to where we were before. Okay, you've got your database, you got your table. Click the plus sign next to your table. And by your table, click the three dots and select Preview Table. Okay, and notice you're getting 10 results at a time. Okay, and again, this is a list of people. And if you wanted to run the query again, notice the limit is we're getting 10 people for each query. Now, if I just add a 0 to the limit and I click Run, okay, this time I get 100 entries of 100 people. Okay, and so you notice they got the sex, the date of birth, the last name, the first name, job titles. Okay, now there's 1,000 people in this database, so you could actually run different kinds of queries. So every time we're running a query, okay, it's automatically saving it to that S3 bucket that we created. So I'm going to delete this limit 100, and let's just say we want to run a query, let's just say with all the females, okay? And so we're going to type where, and the field name is called sex, space, equals, a single quote, and type female. Okay, so your query looks like what I got on the screen here. Okay, and you click run, and this time you get all the only females. Okay, and so just ways you can run different queries. You can do searches by first names and last names. And so what we want to do now is we ran a couple of queries with it. We want to go back to our S3 and see if these queries have been saved into our bucket. Okay, so from here, we can go to S3. And we can go to John Athena Query Results. And notice that it created a folder called Unsaved in 2024, the year, and another subfolder, and another subfolder. And these are our queries, okay? You had the first query, which was limited to 10, the second query, which was limited to 100, and then the third query, which was based on females within the database, okay? And so, again, all this is done in a serverless environment. Okay, so this concludes the lab. So make sure you take your screenshots, provide it in the lab instructions, as always. Thank you.